I stopped someone from jumping on the tracks today. She was a middle-aged woman with chestnut brown hair that came down to her shoulders. Crow's feet, layers of foundation. She's laughed a lot in her life once, but now, not so much. She was carrying several plastic bags full of things. I wasn't able to see what was in them, but if I had to guess, they were groceries for her husband. She lives next to me, third floor of our apartment complex. I hear the hits and hair pulls. I know the purpose of all that makeup. She would always emerge a different shade. I would be just out the door to leave for a checkup when I would see her emerge and fumble with a cigarette and lighter, pressing her body against the balcony railing with an intensity like she wanted to throw herself over it. Her and we stood on top of the yellow line instead of behind it. Sinhyung Station was crowded, and people were huddled together, pushing and pushing. Her eyes were empty and staring ahead, and the bags in her hands were being held so loosely they were slipping from her grip. Her face looked like she felt nothing, but there was a deep agony held captive in her eyes. Last week I noticed she was sitting on a bench below me as I perched myself at the balcony she adored. Her eyes were raining, and it was so cold, she hugged herself tightly, fists under armpits. She was hardly wearing anything. A tan, padded bra, and a white skirt, completely barefoot. At first I thought she was kicked out of her room, but I saw her slowly rise, ascend the staircase eventually, and then gently turn the handle of her door with a shaky manicured hand. I wondered when she was going to be rescued from him. Staying silent, I watched her. She hesitated at her open doorway, and soon she was glancing back towards me. I panicked and pulled my cab down a little lower to hide my eyes from her. I wondered how many times I did not return her gaze. I know I much preferred watching her life than living my own, but when she looks at me, I exist in her life. I feel like she suspected I didn't eat a lot from the scarce amount of trash I get rid of. I hardly ever leave my apartment for long, and I work from home, so she must have assumed I did not dine out. I would catch a glimpse of her from outside my window, cautiously leaving a packaged meal out on my doormat and rushing back to her side. It had only happened a few times, but they were handmade, and I ate what I could keep down. Not once did I ever talk to her, but that was when I knew for sure she acknowledged me. All I had to see was her stepping forward when the train was coming to lash my arm out and grab hers. I pulled her back onto the line, and she stared at me with widened, terrified eyes that should have been directed at her own thoughts. That expression morphed into despair, and she clutched me and clung to me, crying and babbling. I heard her say Miss June in the midst of her rambling, and I wondered when she learned my name, because I never found out hers. I felt her hands come up to my face, and the pads of her fingers brushed tears from my eyes, and that's when I realized I was crying too. Miss Jung, I heard the woman weep. The plastic bags were at her feet, tipped and forgotten, and I couldn't keep my eyes off of her. Up close, I could see the cracks in her face, the knots in her hair, and that smile that used to be there. She was a mother once. The woman held me close, almost cradled me, as if she were the one doing the comforting and I wasn't a 27-year-old stranger. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with emotion, and her lips were trembling, and her hands were quivering. I've never seen her like this before, except when she clutched a cancer stick like a lifeline. Am I the cancer stick this time? I laid my head on her shoulder as the concerned people surrounded us. Someone stopped me from jumping onto the tracks today.